Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Renu Arora, former Head Education and Training Division, CSIR NISCARE, New Delhi. The module that I am going to cover today is Financial Resources of Public Libraries. This module is under the paper, The Public Libraries. Let's take a look at the introduction to the module. Public libraries exist in most countries of the world and are often considered an essential part of an educated and literate population. A review of the income, expenditures, services, and current status of public libraries suggests that the role of the public library is changing. In this module, we will discuss the need, sources of finance, and problems faced in funding of public libraries. Let's now understand what is public library finance. Public libraries require funds as they are an excellent source for continuing education, literary education, and place for leisure reading. They ensure educational, social, and cultural gains for the community for which they exist. Most cities or towns or even villages have access to services of public libraries. In many places where there are no public libraries, we have the mobile libraries, or the villages, they allot a particular room which serves as a public library. Their use is free to all authorized residents within the scope of the particular public library. All the residents of a particular locality have access to all kinds of collection in a public library. Financial management. First of all, let us know what financial management is all about. For any organization to sustain and grow, finance is the most vital requirement. The libraries and information organizations, being service organizations, have a national obligation, especially with regard to those attached to academic and public service organizations. It is therefore important that there should be provision of adequate finance or funds to manage various activities of the organization. As finance, like any other management activity, also requires regular control and evaluation, a few principles are required to management. Now let us know what is financial management. Financial management is the application of general management principles to various financial operations. Finances are essential for every human activity, and success in planning various activities is often dependent on the amount of finance available and the manner in which it is to be utilized. A basic knowledge of finances, therefore, is vital for every library professional and those especially working in the finance department of the organization as well as the library. Let's now define what financial management is. Financial management can be defined as the study of principles and practices involved in the financial operations of any organization. Libraries too are included here, as financial management also deals with various aspects of acquisition, distribution, and utilization of funds besides balancing of revenue and expenditures. A general control and evaluation of financial affairs is also within the purview of financial management. Therefore, knowledge of library finance leads to managing an organization in financial aspects in a better manner. Before we go into the public library finance, let's first understand what the principles of library expenditure are. The principles of library expenditure usually are different from expenditure of other kinds of organizations. The principles of library expenditure are spelled as firstly, principle of economy, secondly, principle of maximum aggregate benefit, thirdly, principle of advanced planning, and lastly, principle of equitable allocation. Let's now explain these principles in little bit of detail. First one, the principle of economy. This means that economy we exercise in all expenditures. Everything that we carry out, everything that we spend, we should try to exercise as much economy as possible. By all means, unnecessary duplication, wastage, and extra spending has to be avoided. Also, the expenditure should not exceed the approved budget. The second principle, that is principle of maximum aggregate benefit. Here, as the libraries are service organizations, they exist for the sole benefit of the user community. Therefore, the librarian should first select the reading material, and while selecting the reading material, take extra care to select only those materials which will be really of maximum benefit to the users. Also, the services have to be planned in such a manner that maximum number of users are able to utilize these services. Thirdly, the principle of advanced planning. It is desired that the library expenditure be planned in advance. This is to ensure that when the time comes to actually carry out an activity, there are no problems. This also helps in balancing the incoming funds and expenditure. In case of journals, advance orders should be placed. This is for avoiding unnecessary unavailability at a later date. The last principle is the principle of equitable allocation. Here we have to ensure that library funds should be suitably and equally distributed for various kinds of reading materials, and care should be taken that all subjects are suitably covered. The balance while building the collection is very much desirable for smooth operation of the library. Similarly, for modern services, more funds be allocated than the traditional and already continuing services. For example, in the public libraries, there are various categories of users. For all those category of users, the principle of equitable finance has to be maintained. Let's now understand what are the sources of finance in public libraries. Basically, the major source of finance in public libraries is the government source. Government is the major funding agency for all the public libraries. And government means basically in public libraries, it is the state which is funding the public library. Also, the local municipalities are also funding the public libraries. Then second source of public finance is library cess. Library cess is a kind of charge from the users of the library, or basically it is the community where the library exists. And thirdly, subscription. Subscription is whosoever are members of the library, they have to pay some subscription, some membership fee for the use of the library. Then there is the income generated by the library from the various services which are offered by the library. And lastly, there are some funding, that is endowments, private donations, or some gifts given by various agencies or individuals, etc. Many times, some individuals, they also donate their own personal private collection, which is a very rich source of information for public libraries. Allocation of funds. Let's now know some details about how funds are to be allocated in libraries for various activities. Financial management is considered to be an integral aspect of management of any organization. Libraries and information organizations too require effective and efficient management of their financial resources. However, information organizations, being not-for-profit making organizations, differ from other organizations as far as the financial allocation is concerned. Libraries have usually been allocating their budget according to a formula based on usage statistics and cost of the materials. In the past few years, this approach has undergone a change due to the changing information technologies. Financial management, therefore, is to be carried out in a proper manner. Allocation of funds is dependent upon several aspects. These are firstly to determine how libraries spend on their resources. Secondly, How much of the share of the total budget is devoted to various services of public libraries? Thirdly, what is the composition of the resources allocated to each of the services? In this connection, it is the services of the public library. Fourthly, what resources could we reallocate to support an existing service or to start a new service? In this connection, we'd like to mention that whatever services are already existing and they need to be carried out in a proper manner, further resources or funding may be required. And on the other hand, in case a new service is to be started, from the very beginning, all the resources and the required funding, etc., is to be allocated for the new service. Besides this, limited funds are available to purchase library materials. Because there is always financial crunch in the libraries and information organizations, funds are always very limited. So within the limited funding available, we have to see what best to buy in the libraries. In addition to this, we have to make sure that there is formal as well as informal allocation of funds, because a lot of activities may require formal and direct allocation, but on the other hand, many activities may not be very much visible and there may be certain hidden expenditures involved. So formal and informal allocation of funds is to be taken care of. And lastly, perception of fairness and rational basis while allocating has to be ensured, because many times it is seen that some activities are given majority of the funds. On the other hand, some activities may not be given as much funding as is actually required to carry out the activity. Library expenditure. Let's now take a look at how library expenditure in public libraries has to be taken care of. Public libraries require finances to operate their services. For each and every activity and service, funding is required. It may be direct finances or indirect finances or shared finances. Public libraries usually spend their finances or money on reading materials, which includes books, journals, pamphlets, magazines, CD-ROMs, etc. User services. Services may be reference service, lending service, etc. Besides that, there may be a lot of consumables and other utilities. The chief characteristics of library expenditure are, in fact, for public libraries also, the chief characteristics of library expenditure are, firstly, library is a spending organization. As we are all aware, libraries are only spending, they have no means of earning a lot of money like other commercial organizations. That is why we refer to libraries as not for profit making organization. Secondly, we have to make sure that library is an organization that keeps growing all the time. All the time, new and new materials are being added to the libraries and they keep on growing. And then the amount of material that we have to remove is rather limited. So the growth aspect has to be taken care of. And lastly, library expenditure is recurring. That means year after year, we are getting funds for carrying out activities. For example, for the same service, every year, new and fresh fund allocation is required to be carried out. Besides this, we must remember that the main aspect of library expenditure is to take care of the fact that users are given maximum benefit by spending the minimum amount possible, because then only more users can be benefited from the services and activities of the library. Let's understand now about the classification of public library expenditure. It has to be understood here that the spending in public libraries is quite different from academic libraries and special libraries. The public libraries have a different category of material, so money has to be spent on collection, which consists of books, journals, periodicals, and other reading material. Besides this, a lot of money has to be spent on salaries and wages. because stationery is used, so next item of expenditure is stationery and other consumables. In addition to this, material has to be bound at a frequent interval, the reason being that there are a wide variety of users like senior citizens, children, young readers, students, etc., visiting the library. So, material has to be put in a proper shape, so binding of material has to be carried out. Then, postage and telecommunication charges are rather high, especially the telecommunication charges, because modern libraries require use of internet as well. Vehicles are another item of expenditure. Then purchase of equipment of course is there, but regular maintenance of the acquired equipment requires a lot of expenditure. Furniture, that is another major expenditure item, because we need furniture for all categories of readers: furniture for staff, furniture for users in the reading room, furniture for students, furniture for young children as well. In addition to this, maintenance of the building, which requires building upkeep, security, cleaning, electricity, water, etc. Then printing and publishing of material in many public libraries requires funding. And lastly, there have to be certain funds kept separately for some miscellaneous expenditures or contingency, etc. Financial system in public libraries in India. Like all the other libraries, the public libraries also are grouped into two categories. Especially the financial aspect is of two kinds. It is statutory system and non-statutory system. The statutory system refers to the very fact that the Indian states which have library legislation fall under this category, and the organization of library services is referred to as the statutory system of library service. On the other hand, the second category, that is non-statutory system. In this case, the states and the union territories of India that have not enacted library legislation are also having public library systems. In this system, the government is not bound by any law as to how the monetary activities are to be carried out, how funds have to be exhausted. These states are carrying out their library activities either through the direct government grants or the grant in aid system. This is referred to as the non-statutory system. In fact, it is very difficult to say which system is working well, because in many states, although there is no library legislation, the system is working very well. On the other hand, in states where there is library legislation, that is the statutory system, even there, due to lack of proper finances, the work is not carried out in a proper manner. So it varies, and both the categories of financial systems are prevalent in our country presently. Let's now examine the sources of finance for public libraries in India. In fact, there are four categories of sources of finance for public libraries, namely central government, state government, local funding, and other sources. Let's know about each category. Firstly, the state government. The state governments usually provide the library legislation enabled funding. The state has made provisions to provide funding, and as per the statutory or non-statutory system, funding is made available. If in case there is library legislation, then suitable funding is ensured. Besides this, the central government is another funding body. In fact, majority of the public libraries are getting their funding from central government. It is direct funding coming from the central government. Thirdly, local funding. Local funding is usually from the local taxes, library fees and fines, library cess, and besides this, any other means by which library can acquire some kind of income, and that funding is referred to as local funding. Besides this, the local municipality, it may supplement the local funding. Then there are miscellaneous sources. These could be gifts and private donations of money by some benefactors. And besides that, there may be special grants and there may be interest earned on deposits. Special grants many times are available from central and state government. These could be for some specific activities. For example, in the recent years, many libraries have been going in for library automation, and one-time special grants are being made available from central government or state governments. Besides that, special funding may be available from Raja Rammohun Roy Library Foundation. This foundation has been specifically developed to support the public library system in our country. One of the aspects with regard to Raja Rammohun Roy Library Foundation is that it does not give funding for starting a new library, but for the existing library, if any activity has to be enhanced or newly added, funding may be made available. Let's now examine how funding from central government is made available to the public libraries. Funding for public libraries, though not the majority, comes from central government funding. Libraries can also benefit from other types of central funding. This is usually through the 5-year plans which are involved in setting up of major new libraries or various library committees, etc. The government sets up various library committees, working groups, etc. from time to time, and the recommendations of these committees also involve major recommendations related to finance. The year 1986 saw adoption of the National Literacy Mission, which emphasized on the allocation of fund for education of women and also the establishment of rural libraries. Besides this, a working group on modernization of library services and informatics in the 7th 5-year plan also ensured that funding is made available. In its 1984 report, the group recommended formulation of a national policy on library services and informatics. National Knowledge Commission has also been set up with knowledge as the key area, under which special focus is on libraries and public libraries too. Besides this, the different committees and working groups can be set up on ad hoc basis to give recommendations on providing fund from time to time in case some special new activities are to be taken up by the public libraries. Let's now examine how state government makes available funding for public libraries. The two aspects attributed to the fund available from state government are firstly, as provision as per library legislation. Secondly, setting up of state library committees. States that have enacted library legislation receive proper funding from state authorities for maintaining the public libraries, and the states that have not yet passed library law do have some kind of system for receiving funds for their public libraries. Thus, the state funding for public libraries provides far more funds than central government sources, but still far less than what the local sources make available. Besides this, Raja Rammohun Roy Library Foundation has recommended setting up of a state library committee in each state and union territory of India. Foundation's assistance is available for all categories of public libraries. State Library Committee decides number and categories of libraries for assistance under different schemes and consolidated list of books for different categories of libraries. Besides this, state governments may have provision for some special grants or some kind of endowments, etc. Let's now examine how local funding helps in setting up or working of public libraries. In fact, local funds make up a major portion of public library funding. Although the monies may not be enough, but still from the local funding, the fund is coming on a regular basis. These funds are usually gathered from local taxes, library fees, and fines, library cess, etc. The local municipalities also play an important role in providing funds to public libraries, and most librarians apply for grants to supplement these funds. The proportions of funding depends on where the library is located. In case a library is located in a very clean area, posh area with educated personnel around it, then the funding may be coming in a very easy manner, because the users of the library and the other people associated with the library in the area make sure that regular fund in a proper way is made available for the library. But on the other hand, if the library is in a thinly populated area or in a place where there aren't too many users using the public library, then the funds may be very difficult to come. In general, the municipality too provides the greatest percentage of funding for public libraries, and it is the responsibility of the local legislators, etc., to ensure that the proper funding is made available for public libraries. Raja Rammohun Roy Library Foundation. Raja Rammohun Roy Library Foundation is a central government's autonomous organization established and fully financed by the Ministry of Culture, Government of India. This organization functions as a promotional agency and advisory and consultancy organization. It is basically a funding body for public library development in India. The organization also ensures that public library services and systems are carried out in a proper manner. Besides this, the Raja Rammohun Roy Library Foundation also promotes public library movement in India. The foundation works in close association and active cooperation with different state governments and territory administrations through a machinery called State Library Planning Committee, SLPC or SLC, set up in each state at the instance of the foundation. Raja Rammohun Roy Library Foundation Assistance Program. A major activity of Raja Rammohun Roy Library Foundation is Assistance Program, which is explained in the RRRLF website, which can be visited at http://rrlf.nic.in/activefrm.htm. Besides this, Raja Rammohun Roy Library Foundation promotes public library services. And secondly, assistance is in the form of matching and non-matching funds. The Raja Rammohun Roy Library Foundation promotes public library service rendering book and financial assistance to the public libraries under different schemes of assistance in collaboration with library development or department in charge of public library services. When we say grant is given, matching grant is given, matching means assistance is given from the resources shared on matching basis with the state, union, territories or administrators. For developed states, 50 by 50%. For developing and lagging states, 60-40 ratio, and northeastern states, 90:10 matching funds are provided. And with regard to non-matching funds, funds are for building public library collection, special public library services, and carrying out special activities and programs for conferences, seminars, etc. The non-matching funds are usually a one-time grant which is given for carrying out some specific activity. We have already seen that sources of finance are usually from state government or local municipalities. Besides that, public libraries have also many other sources of finance. These can be fines for overdue books, sale of waste material, exchange or receiving free publication. Then there are many times gifts and donations of money, or gifts are in the form of books or equipment, etc. Besides this, there is interest earned from deposits which are given to the library. Then there are private donations. Private donations could be in the form of money or a kind of fixed deposit or a private collection of a benefactor. Then there are special grants which are given by government or some private benefactors. These are in the form of technology grants, focus on a particular subject or topic, or it could be education grants that refers to school reading programs offered by many public libraries. Funding problems in public libraries. In fact, most of the public libraries rely only on government funding. Cost of reading materials has gone up tremendously. Volume and variety of reading materials leads to extra costs. There is lack of legislation in many states. And besides this, implementation of library legislation in Indian states where enacted has been uneven. And as already informed, public libraries rely very heavily on government funding. But with the increasing costs, the public libraries are compelled to look beyond the parent bodies that make available the funds. The public is mostly unaware of financial difficulties facing their libraries. They are always asking for new and better books without realizing how the cost of books and other library documents has gone up in the last 2 or 3 decades. But then users, they never realize the financial difficulties which are facing their libraries. There is sufficient but latent support for increased library funding among the general population. Thus, the public libraries, long supported by various government entities, have seen a decline in monetary support for several decades. This is leading to deterioration of the public libraries. So, in order to ensure that public libraries don't have any funding problem, the central and the state governments should take matters in their hands and ensure that proper funding is provided to the whole of public library system. In this module, we have discussed role of modern public libraries in society. We have also seen what is public library finance. Public libraries, being spending organizations, usually do not earn any revenue for the services rendered by them. But some modern public libraries are also charging for some of the services. Financial support in the public libraries is usually from the government and non-government agencies. In addition to that, sources of public library finance are central government, state government, local funding, and from many other organizations. Amongst the other organizations, one of the main funding agencies is the Raja Rammohun Roy Public Library Foundation, which is sponsoring funding of a lot of public libraries, especially in the modernization plan of the public libraries. We have also seen the various funding problems in public libraries.